Maya Carter walked into the brightly lit boutique, excited to look at the latest fashion items. She loved visiting her father's store, not just because he owned it, but because it was one of the best clothing boutiques in the city. The shelves were lined with stylish handbags, expensive watches, and beautiful dresses. The soft music playing in the background made the place feel warm and welcoming. Dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, Maya wandered through the aisles, her fingers lightly touching the soft fabrics. She wasn't in a rush. She had been here many times before, and the employees knew her. Still, she liked to take her time, admiring the new collections her father brought in every few weeks. Outside the store, Officer Randall Cooper walked through the mall on his usual patrol. He was supposed to ensure safety, but sometimes he made judgments too quickly. As he passed by the boutique, his eyes landed on Maya. Something about her casual clothes made him assume she didn't belong in such a high-end store. He slowed his steps, narrowing his eyes as he watched her pick up a purse. Maya turned the bag over, admiring its design. It was sleek, made of soft leather, and had a golden clasp that shined under the store's lights. She smiled, thinking it might be a great gift for her mother's birthday. Just as she was about to set it back down, she noticed Officer Cooper watching her from the entrance. She felt a chill run through her body, but chose to ignore him. She moved to another display, looking at a pair of bracelets neatly arranged on a velvet cushion. Their delicate designs sparkled under the light. She reached out to touch one, enjoying the cool feel of the metal. Officer Cooper's suspicion grew. In his mind, Maya wasn't admiring the jewelry. She was trying to steal it. His grip tightened on his belt as he stepped inside the store. His heavy boots clicked against the polished floor, making Maya glance up. "Excuse me, miss," he said in a firm voice. "What do you think you're doing?" Maya blinked in confusion. "Looking," she replied calmly. The officer folded his arms. "Looking, huh? I saw you pick up that purse earlier. Now you're touching the bracelets. Are you planning to pay for anything?" Maya's eyebrows furrowed. "I didn't take anything," she said, her voice steady but annoyed. Officer Cooper didn't seem to hear her. He glanced around, as if expecting the store employees to back him up, but they stayed silent, unsure of what to do. "I think it's best if you come with me," he said, reaching for the handcuffs on his belt. Maya took a step back, her heart pounding. "Wait, what? I didn't do anything." But the officer had already made up his mind. In his eyes, she was guilty, and he was going to make sure she paid for it. Maya stared at the officer in shock. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Just moments ago, she had been peacefully browsing the store, and now a police officer was accusing her of something she didn't do. "I told you, I didn't steal anything," Maya said firmly, keeping her voice calm. She didn't want to cause a scene, but she also wasn't going to let herself be treated unfairly. Officer Cooper didn't seem to care about her words. He stepped closer, his eyes locked onto her like she had already done something wrong. "I saw you touching the items," he said. "People don't just come into stores like this, pick things up, and walk away without buying." Maya frowned. "That's what customers do. They look at things before deciding whether to buy them." The officer shook his head. "I think you're just making excuses. You can explain yourself at the station." Maya's frustration grew. She looked around the store, hoping one of the employees would speak up. She recognized a few of them. Some had worked there for years. But no one said a word. Some looked away, pretending to be busy. Others watched, their faces uncertain. No one wanted to challenge a police officer. She turned back to Officer Cooper. "Check the cameras," she said. "If you think I stole something, prove it." The officer's expression didn't change. "We'll deal with all that later. Right now, you're coming with me." Before Maya could say anything else, he reached for her wrist and grabbed it. The cold metal of the handcuffs touched her skin as he snapped one around her wrist. Maya gasped. "Wait, this is a mistake," she protested. "You're making a big mistake." Customers in the store had started watching the scene unfold. Some whispered to each other, their eyes filled with curiosity. A few took out their phones, recording the moment. Maya's face burned with embarrassment. She had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, being treated like a criminal in front of strangers. She struggled slightly, trying to pull her hand away. "Let me call my dad," she said. "He'll clear this up." Officer Cooper shook his head. "You'll make your call at the station," he said, tightening his grip. "For now, you're under arrest." Maya felt anger rise in her chest. This wasn't fair. She had seen other people in the store, touching the same items she had touched. No one else was being accused. No one else was being taken away in handcuffs. As the officer led her toward the exit, she turned her head one last time, looking at the employees. She could see guilt on some of their faces, but still, no one spoke up. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding. This wasn't over. Not even close. Maya's hands were tightly cuffed as Officer Cooper led her toward the exit. She felt the cold metal pressing against her wrists, a constant reminder of the unfairness of the situation. Her heart pounded as she looked around, hoping someone would step in and stop this, but no one did. Customers whispered to each other, some holding their phones up, recording everything. The store employees, who knew exactly who she was, stood frozen, afraid to get involved. Maya's face burned with embarrassment. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was being treated like a criminal. She struggled to stay calm, but frustration built inside her like a storm. "This is a mistake," she said again, her voice firmer this time. "I didn't steal anything." Officer Cooper didn't even look at her. His grip on her arm tightened slightly as he continued walking. "Save it for later," he said. "You should have thought about that before you tried to take something that wasn't yours." Maya gritted her teeth. He wasn't even listening. It didn't matter what she said. He had already decided she was guilty. As they stepped outside the boutique, the bright lights of the mall made everything feel even more surreal. People in the mall stopped to stare. Some gasped. Others pulled out their phones to record. The more people gathered, the more embarrassed Maya felt. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. "At least let me call my dad. Please." Officer Cooper sighed, clearly growing impatient. "You'll get your one phone call when we get to the station," he said. Maya wanted to scream. He had no idea what he was doing. If he had just listened for 1 second, he would know the truth. But he wasn't interested in the truth. He was only interested in proving himself right. As they reached the entrance of the mall, Maya suddenly heard her phone ringing. She turned her head slightly and saw it lying on the ground, where it must have fallen during the struggle. The screen lit up with the caller ID. "Dad, store owner." Officer Cooper noticed the phone too. His eyes flickered with confusion for a brief second before he reached down and picked it up. His expression changed slightly as he read the name on the screen. He looked at Maya, then back at the phone. "What's this?" he asked. Maya's voice was calm but firm. "That's my dad, the owner of the store you just arrested me in." For the first time since the whole ordeal started, Officer Cooper hesitated. The confidence in his face wavered just a little. The ringing phone in his hand seemed to make him uneasy. Maya held his gaze, her eyes filled with quiet defiance. "You just made a huge mistake," she said. The officer didn't respond. He simply stood there, gripping the phone, as the weight of the situation slowly started to sink in. Officer Cooper stood frozen for a moment, still holding Maya's ringing phone. His confident expression from earlier was gone, replaced by uncertainty. The name on the screen, "Dad, store owner," made his grip tighten slightly. He glanced at Maya, who was watching him with a steady, determined gaze. The phone stopped ringing for a brief moment, but before he could say anything, it started ringing again. The same name flashed across the screen. Maya took a deep breath. "Answer it," she said. Her voice was calm but firm. "Go ahead. Tell my dad why you just arrested me in his store." Officer Cooper's jaw tightened. He didn't like the way this was turning, but the gathering crowd was growing larger, and the cameras were still recording. He let out a slow breath, then pressed the answer button, putting the phone to his ear. "Hello," he said, keeping his tone neutral. The voice on the other end was deep and serious. "This is Charles Carter. Who is this, and why are you answering my daughter's phone?" Officer Cooper hesitated for just a second before responding. "This is Officer Cooper. Your daughter was caught attempting to steal from a store, so I—" "Steal?" Charles cut him off, his voice sharp. "From where?" Officer Cooper cleared his throat. "A boutique in the mall." There was a pause on the other end. Then Charles spoke again, his voice even firmer than before. "That boutique belongs to me." The officer's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. His eyes flickered toward Maya, who was still standing there, her hands cuffed, waiting for him to realize his mistake. "I suggest you let my daughter go right now," Charles continued. "And you better have a very good explanation for this." Officer Cooper swallowed hard. His grip on Maya's arm loosened. The crowd around them murmured, sensing the shift in power. Some people were smiling now, clearly enjoying the moment. Maya watched as the officer slowly exhaled. He knew he had messed up, and now he had no choice but to fix it. Without another word, he pulled out his keys and unlocked the cuffs. The metal clicked open, and Maya rubbed her wrists as she took a step back. She didn't say anything. She just waited. Officer Cooper handed her the phone. "Your father wants to talk to you," he muttered. Maya took it, holding it up to her ear. "Dad, are you okay?" Charles asked, his voice filled with concern. "I'm fine," she said, even though her heart was still racing. "But this officer just embarrassed me in front of a whole crowd for no reason." Charles sighed heavily on the other end. "Stay right there. I'm on my way." Maya ended the call and looked back at Officer Cooper, who was now standing stiffly, avoiding her gaze. "This isn't over," she said simply. And deep down, the officer knew she was right. A tense silence hung in the air as Maya stood rubbing her wrists, her eyes locked on Officer Cooper. The crowd around them had grown even larger, with more people whispering and recording the scene. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others looked at the officer with disapproval. It was clear that everyone had realized what had just happened, except him. Maya's father, Charles Carter, arrived within minutes. Dressed in a sharp suit, he walked through the mall with a commanding presence. The second he saw Maya standing there, freed from the cuffs but still shaken, his expression darkened. He moved quickly toward her, his eyes scanning her for any signs of harm. "You okay?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with concern. Maya nodded. "I am now." Charles then turned to Officer Cooper. His face was unreadable, but his tone carried the weight of authority. "So tell me, officer," he said, folding his arms, "what exactly did my daughter do wrong?" Officer Cooper hesitated. He was no longer as confident as before. The realization of his mistake had settled in, but he still tried to defend his actions. "She was acting suspicious," he muttered. "She picked up a purse, looked at jewelry, and didn't make a purchase." Charles raised an eyebrow. "So did every other customer in that store. Did you arrest them too?" The officer opened his mouth but had no response. His gaze flickered to the crowd, which was now fully focused on him. The people recording hadn't stopped. Every second of this was being captured. Charles shook his head, letting out a slow breath. "You walked into my store, accused my daughter of something she didn't do, embarrassed her in front of all these people, and arrested her, without a shred of evidence." His voice was calm, but the intensity behind it was impossible to ignore. "Tell me, officer, would you have done the same thing if she looked different?" Officer Cooper stiffened, his lips pressed together in a thin line. He glanced around as if searching for an escape, but there was none. He had been so sure of himself before. Now he had nowhere to hide. Charles turned to the store employees, who had been silent until now. "Did my daughter take anything?" The manager stepped forward nervously. "No, sir. She didn't steal anything." Charles nodded, then looked back at the officer. "Then I want an explanation." Right now. Officer Cooper cleared his throat. I was just doing my job, he said quickly. Charles took a step closer. No, he corrected. You abused your job. The weight of those words settled heavily between them. The officer shifted uncomfortably, realizing that there was no way to fix this. The damage had already been done. Maya watched quietly, knowing this moment wasn't just about her. It was about something bigger, and she wasn't going to let it be ignored. Officer Cooper stood there, still trying to find words to justify his actions, but he couldn't. Charles had him cornered. The officer's usual confidence had melted away, replaced by an awkward silence that lingered in the air. Maya could see the officer's discomfort, but she didn't feel sorry for him. He deserved every bit of it. Around them, the crowd had grown quieter. People were watching, some still recording, others murmuring about what had just happened. Maya could feel the weight of their eyes on her, but this time, it didn't bother her. She was no longer the one being judged. Charles crossed his arms and gave the officer a long, steady look. Do you know who I am? He asked, his voice low but firm. Officer Cooper shifted nervously. You're the store owner, right? Charles nodded. That's right. And I'm not just going to let you walk away from this. You've embarrassed my daughter, and you've made a mockery of your position as a police officer. I want to know why you thought it was okay to treat her like that. The officer opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was caught in a lie, and there was nothing he could do to explain his actions. His posture was stiff, his face reddened with shame. Maya watched, feeling a mix of emotions. The embarrassment was still there, but anger was starting to take over. She wasn't going to let this go. Not after everything that had happened. Charles turned his gaze to the people watching. You all saw it, he said, his voice now loud enough for everyone to hear. You saw my daughter being dragged out of a store for doing nothing. You saw a police officer judge her without any reason other than the color of her skin. This isn't right, and we all know it. The crowd, which had been quiet up until now, murmured in agreement. A few people nodded, their faces showing support for Maya. One person even stepped forward, holding up their phone, showing a video of the entire incident. Maya could feel the tension in the air, but now it was on the officer. People were no longer afraid to speak up. The support was overwhelming. Charles wasn't finished. He turned back to Officer Cooper, his expression hardening. You have two choices right now. You can apologize for your actions, or you can face the consequences. Because I promise you, this isn't over. The officer's mouth opened again, but still no words came out. Maya could see that he was realizing how serious the situation was. The other customers, the employees, and now the entire crowd watching were all witnesses to his failure. Maya could feel her chest tighten with a sense of power. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't the one in the wrong. The officer had made the choice to hurt her, and now it was his turn to face the music. Charles took out his phone, making a call without waiting for a response. I'm calling my lawyer, he said, his voice cool and controlled. You'll be hearing from him soon. And trust me, this isn't going to end quietly. The officer's face paled even more, and he took a step back, realizing the seriousness of what had just unfolded. He hadn't just made a mistake, he had crossed a line. And now, there would be consequences. Maya stood tall next to her father, her anger turning into determination. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. This was about standing up for what was right. She wasn't going to let anyone forget what had happened here today. As the seconds stretched into minutes, Maya felt a mix of emotions, anger, frustration, but also something else, a sense of justice beginning to take shape. Her father was standing by her, his calm yet powerful demeanor sending a clear message that he wasn't going to let this slide. Officer Cooper had underestimated both of them. And now, the whole mall was witnessing the consequences of his actions. The crowd around them grew restless, some people still recording, others talking among themselves. The manager of the boutique, who had been nervous earlier, stepped forward hesitantly. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to say that we had no part in this. We don't know why the officer acted the way he did." Charles gave her a nod, acknowledging her concern. "I appreciate you saying that," he replied, his voice calm. "But the problem isn't with the store. The problem is with the officer who decided to target my daughter for no reason." Maya noticed how the manager seemed almost relieved to hear that. She didn't expect the employees to speak out, but it was clear they were uncomfortable with what had happened. Then, just as Charles finished his call, a tall man in a suit approached. He had the look of someone important, perhaps a mall manager or someone from security. The new arrival stepped up to Officer Cooper and addressed him in a stern tone. "Officer Cooper," the man said, his eyes never leaving the officer's face, "we've reviewed the footage from the security cameras. Your actions here today were completely unjustified. We don't tolerate the kind of behavior in this mall, especially toward our customers." Officer Cooper stiffened, his face turning an even deeper shade of red. He tried to speak but was interrupted again. "You'll need to come with me," the mall manager continued. "We're going to have a serious discussion about what happened here." The officer's eyes widened, and he seemed to shrink under the man's words. Maya could see the fear in his eyes now, fear that had been absent when he had first walked into the store with so much confidence. Charles turned to Maya, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did great, honey," he said quietly. Maya nodded, her chest swelling with pride. She knew her father was proud of her, but more than that, she was proud of herself. She had kept calm in the face of everything that had happened, and now she was seeing the justice she had hoped for. The mall manager gave Officer Cooper one last look before turning to Charles. "I'll make sure you're kept updated on what happens next," he said, "and I'm truly sorry for the way this was handled. We don't condone this kind of treatment." Maya felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The apology, while not undoing the damage, was an important first step. She knew there were still many steps to go. There would be legal consequences. There would be investigations. But she felt a sense of relief knowing the tide was turning in her favor. "Thank you," Charles said, his voice steady. He glanced at Officer Cooper, who was now quietly walking toward the mall's security office with the mall manager, his shoulders slumped. It was obvious he knew his career could be on the line. As they all began to disperse, Maya felt her father's hand on her back, guiding her toward the exit of the mall. "Let's get you home," he said. For the first time that day, Maya smiled. She didn't need to say anything. The battle wasn't over, but the fight had been worth it. With her father by her side, she knew that no matter what happened next, she had already won. The drive home was quiet, but Maya could feel the weight of everything that had happened still pressing on her mind. Her father had been calm and collected throughout the ordeal, and his confidence had helped her stay strong. But now, in the car, she found herself reflecting on the day's events. Her father noticed her silence and gave her a gentle glance. "Are you okay?" Maya nodded, though her emotions were still a mix of anger and relief. "I think so," she replied softly. "It just doesn't feel real yet, like it's all still sinking in." Charles smiled warmly, his voice reassuring. "It'll take time. But remember this, you stood up for yourself, and you were right to do so. You didn't let anyone get away with treating you unfairly." Maya turned to look out the window, watching the city pass by. "It's just crazy. All because I was shopping. I don't even know how he thought that was okay." "I know," her father said, his voice firm, "but this is bigger than just what happened today. This is about making sure it doesn't happen again, whether it's to you or anyone else." Maya looked at him. "Do you really think things can change?" Charles was quiet for a moment, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "I hope so," he said. "The way people are treated matters. It always has. But it's not always easy to change things overnight." He paused before continuing. "The important part is that you didn't back down. You stood your ground, and that's how change starts." Maya smiled a little, grateful for his words. He was right. Today wasn't just about her. It was about challenging the system, about making people take notice of what was wrong. When they arrived home, Charles opened the door to their house and turned to her. "I'll take care of things with the lawyer," he said, "and we'll figure out what needs to be done next. But for now, you get some rest. You've been through a lot today." Maya nodded, feeling the exhaustion finally catching up to her. The weight of the entire day had taken its toll, but she couldn't help but feel proud of how she'd handled everything. As she walked inside, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen to see a message from her best friend, Olivia. It was simple but meaningful. "I'm so proud of you. You're amazing." Maya couldn't help but smile. It felt good to know she had people who supported her, who understood the weight of what she had been through. She set the phone down on the counter and collapsed onto the couch, her body aching from the tension of the day. But there was something different now. The anger she had felt earlier had been replaced by a quiet sense of strength. She had faced down an unjust situation, and with her father's help, she had made sure that the truth came out. In the days that followed, things moved quickly. The lawyer Charles had called got to work immediately, gathering the evidence and preparing for the next steps. Officer Cooper was placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation into his actions. The media picked up the story, and soon, Maya's experience was a topic of conversation everywhere, on social media, in the news, and in the community. But Maya didn't feel the need to explain herself to anyone. She had already done that, in the most powerful way possible. She had stood up for what was right, and in doing so, she had shown the world that things could and would change.